Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Insha'Allah ta'ala, as some of the brothers wanted to read through this book, which is an important book in the topic or the science of Usul al-Fiqh, we'll start to read through al-Usool or Usul Min Ilm al-Usool by Shaykh Muhammad ibn Salih or Ibn Salih al-Uthaymin rahimahullaah ta'ala. I'll try my best inshallah not to add anything from outside of the book, whether it be from the Shaykh's own sharh or other books of the same level or other books in general in this topic. The main aim is to understand what the author rahimahullaah ta'ala means in what he is saying inside of the book with regards to the topic of Usul al-Fiqh, so that we don't become drowned by details and end up missing the main points. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll read it in Arabic and we'll also have a look at the English with it. So it's important either that you learn Arabic or that in the meantime, while you're learning Arabic and you're studying this, then the key terminology, you try to keep it, understand it in English, but keep the Arabic words. Because if you start to translate terminology, it will become a lot more difficult later on. And the work will become double. So today, inshallah ta'ala, we'll look at the author's introduction, and within it he also, or the first chapter with it, wherein he talks about the subject of Usul al-Fiqh, what it means as a subject, what it means individually, or the first person to collect it as a subject, and some of the fawaid of it. So the author rahimahullah ta'ala starts with this introduction. And then he says, أما بعد فهذه رسالة مختصرة في أصول الفقه كتبناها على وفق منهج مقرر للسنة الثالثة الثانوية. In here, the author is talking why he wrote the book. So this book he wrote, and some of the other books that he has, which are good books, introductory books, he wrote as part of a curriculum that was being introduced in the country. And then he goes on to mention that he called this al-Usool min Ilm al-Usool. And then he makes a dua at the end, in the short introduction, that he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make the author's actions and our actions in general for the sake of Allah and beneficial to the servant of Allah. For verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Qareeb Mujib. Then he begins today's section. He begins here by titling it Usul al-Fiqh. So there's a couple of things that we're going to speak about in this part of the book. The first thing that we want to look at is what the author says, the ta'rif or the definition. Usul al-Fiqh يعرف باعتبارين. It can be this title that we mentioned as Usul al-Fiqh can be defined from two angles. Number one, the first angle that you can look at when you're looking at this definition is by looking at mufradayha, its two individual words, i.e. usul as one word and fiqh as another word. So you can look at it from this angle where you look at each word individually. And the other way that he's going to mention later is that you can look at it as these two words compounded or put together. So first he introduces us to, okay, what does each word mean? So here says بِاعْتِبَارِ كَلِمَةِ أُصُول وَكَلِمَةِ الْفِقْهِ. From the angle of, you can look at this definition from the angle of each individual word, the first being usul and the second one being fiqh. And he goes on to explain, فَالْأُصُول جَمْعُ أَصْلٍ. Usul is the plural of asl, and asl is وَهُوَ مَا يُبْنَى عَلَيْهِ غَيْرُ. The asl is that which something else is built upon it. So for example, you can say that the asl of a building are the foundations, or the asl of a tree is its trunk, the part which the other branches come out of it. And then he brings the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ ضرب الله مثلا كلمة طيبة كشجرة طيبة أصلها ثابت وفرعها في السماء. So do you not see how Allah brought forth an example of a good word like the good tree whose foundation is strong and its branches فرعها are high in the heavens. The main point being here, the first word is usul. It is the plural of asl, and asl is a foundation, something that something else is built upon. That's the linguistic meaning of the word. Then he goes on to mention wal-fiqh. The second of these two words is al-Fiqh. Okay, if we look at this word individually, then he says lughatan fiqh in the language is al-fahm, is understanding. وَمِنْهُ قَوْلُهُ تَعَالَى, and from it, from the way or from the highlights where you can see that this word linguistically is used to mean understanding. وَحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً مِّن لِسَانِي يَفْقَهُ قَوْلِي. This is a dua that Musa made, and Allah is telling us this dua. And undo the knot which is on my tongue, such that they may understand. يَفْقَهُ, so that they may understand my speech. So that's fiqh from the regards of linguistic meaning, the language meaning of the word. It indicates understanding. Okay, what about istilahan? Istilahan means as a terminology. What does fiqh mean as a terminology? And he brings us here a number of things. So now here he brings us the terminology or the definition of fiqh as a technical term. He says ma'rifah al-ahkam al-shar'iyyah al-amaliyah bi-adillatiha al-tafsiliyah. So fiqh, this word here, from a technical point of view, is knowing, ma'rifah, knowing, having an awareness of al-ahkam al-shar'iyyah. So we can put this if we wanted to highlight this, you can highlight this as 1, al-ahkam al-shar'iyyah, 2, al-amaliyah, 3, bi-adillatiha, and then, okay, let's undo that one, bi-adillatiha al-tafsiliyah. So if we were to, maybe in the future we can try use different color. So we can break this down into 4 things, or you could do 5 to break it down, but either way. Ma'rifah is to know. Al-ahkam al-shar'iyyah, the Islamic rulings. For example, it's not talking about rulings to do with the aql, or not talking about rulings to do with the adat. The adat being reoccurring issues that occur. So for example, he will give examples that when you see the sky is a certain, the clouds are a certain way in the sky, then you can see that it's going to rain lightly. How do you know that? That is a rule based upon the ada, the reoccurring events that you've witnessed. Okay. Al-amaliyah, which these rules in fiqh are to do with the actions of the person. And then the last part of the definition, bi-adillatiha at-tafsiliyah, with their specific evidences. So this at-tafsiliyah specific and adillatiha evidences, as opposed to general evidences, which is what usul al-fiqh deals with. So here, this is the definition of fiqh. Here it goes back to this definition here, goes back to fiqh here. Fiqh, technically, as a terminology, means this definition, which we broke into 4 pieces. The Shaykh goes on to mention, فَالْمُرَادُ بِقَوْلِنَا مَعْرِفَةً. So what we mean by ma'rifah in this definition is al-ilm wa-dhann, knowledge and most likely level of knowledge. So you're not 100% certain, but it's the most likely view. لأن إدراك الأحكام الفقهية قد يكون يقينيا وقد يكون ظنيا. Because the ahkam, or comprehending, perceiving the rules of fiqh, can either be for sure, ilm, yaqeen, knowledge, or ظنيا, the most likely thing, although you may not have yaqeen on that thing. You may not have yaqeen on that aspect. Then he says, كما في كثير من مسائل الفقه, like it is the case, or as is the case with many of the issues of fiqh. So that's this part of the definition, ma'rifah. The second part of the definition, the Shaykh says, ومراد بقولنا الأحكام الشرعية. And in the definition, when we said ahkam al-shar'iyya, the rulings of the Islamic or Islam, of the Sharia, he says al-ahkam al-mutalaqqatu min al-shar', the rules which are taken from the legislation, كالوجوب والتحريم, like something being wajib or something being haram. فخرج به الأحكام العقلية. So this part of the definition excludes for us the ahkam, the rulings which come from the mind, rational rulings. Like for example, knowing that a whole is bigger than a half. Everybody knows that a whole, when you have something which is full, is bigger, like you have a full let's think, okay, you have a full plate, or a whole bread, a whole loaf of bread is bigger than a half of that. Also, when we say ahkam al-shar'iyya, it excludes al-ahkam al-adiyya, the ahkam which are from ada, which are from reoccurring things that you perceive. Like we mentioned before, he gives an example, like when you see that a certain weather is in a certain way, then you most likely know that there's going to be light rain and so forth. Then the third thing that he mentioned in his definition of fiqh, not usul fiqh but fiqh he is talking about, وَالْمُرَادُ بِقَوْلِنَا الْعَمَلِيَّةِ, and what we intended in our definition when we said amaliyya, the actions, مَا لَا يَتَعَلَّقُ بِالْإِعْتِقَادِ, i.e. those things which are not attached to, or not attached to, rather those which are not connected with i'tiqad, the belief. So when we talk about fiqh as a technical term, fiqh, then the author is telling us that we are dealing with rulings, Islamic rulings, and knowledge of the Islamic rulings which are connected to the actions, not to the beliefs, not to the i'tiqad. So he says كالصلاة والزكاة, like salah and zakah. فخرج به ما يتعلق بالاعتقاد. So this part of the definition excludes for us that which is connected to the belief system. كتوحيد الله ومعرفة أسمائه وصفاته فلا يسمى ذلك فقها في الاصطلاح. Like the tawheed of Allah and knowing Allah's names and His attributes. This is not to be called fiqh in the istilah, in our terminology here, because there are, in terms of understanding, yes, it's al-fiqh al-akbar, as some of the books that came before us. The main point the author is making here is that fiqh is knowing the Islamic rulings, dealing with the actions, not the beliefs, for example. And then he says, وَالْمُرَادُ بِقَوْلِنَا بِأَدِلَّتِهَا التَّفْصِيلِيَّةِ, and what we intend when we say al-adillah al-tafsiliyya, أدلة الفقه المقرونة بمسائل الفقه التفصيلية, the evidences which are accompanied or which accompany the issues of fiqh at-tafsiliyya. Like for example, when you study fiqh, you say, okay, water is of 3 types, or you might say salah is obligatory, and then the author will bring you, or the Shaykh will bring you an evidence. The evidence that he brings you is tafsiliyya, is a specific evidence in that issue. It's not going to be a general evidence that covers different chapters, but it's a specific evidence. So here the author is saying to us that fiqh as a subject deals with the specific evidences. He says here, فَخَرَجَ بِهِ أُصُولُ الْفِقْهِ. So this, knowing that fiqh deals with the specific evidences, this then excludes for us usul al-fiqh. What is researched in usul al-fiqh? The research will be with regards to the evidences which are general, comprehensive evidences, not the specific evidences which are mentioned in usul al-fiqh. So all of this that he's mentioned so far is looking at the title Usul al-Fiqh from the angle of each word. He said Usul means such and such, and he gave us the linguistic meaning. Fiqh means, and he gave us the linguistic meaning to understand, and then he gave us the technical meaning, which we broke down the definition, or him himself broke down the definition into 4 parts. Now he's going to say athani. Athani here means the second way. Remember, he said here that you can look at it from 2 angles. Okay, so he looked at the first way here. Now he is going to look at the second way, athani. And it is the second way to look at the title Usul al-Fiqh is bi'tibari kawnihi laqaban lihadha al-fan al-mu'ayyan. Is from the angle of this title, Usul al-Fiqh, being a laqab, a title or name for this specific subject, لهذا الفن المعين. So this subject then, Usul al-Fiqh as a subject, the second way of looking at definition, when you look at it as a subject, then it comprises of 3 things. Okay? Number 1, ilm an adillat al-fiqh al-ijmaliyya. So now if we look at Usul al-Fiqh as the title of a subject, what does it mean? What is that subject? What does it deal with? So the first part of the definition is this: ilmun yubhathu or yabhathu an adillat al-fiqh al-ijmaliyya. It is a science or a subject that looks at the evidences of fiqh which are general, general evidences. That's the first part of the definition. Second part of the definition, وَكَيْفِيَّةُ الْإِسْتِفَادَةِ مِنْهَا, and how to benefit from these evidences. So now you looked at the evidences which are general. Okay, the second part of the Usul al-Fiqh as a definition is how do you benefit from these evidences? How do you use them? These are like tools. How do you use the tools? And then he mentions the third part of Usul al-Fiqh, وَحَالُ الْمُسْتَفِيدِ, and the hal, the condition of the one who benefits from this subject, i.e. who is the one that benefits from Usul al-Fiqh. And that's going to be the mujtahid, the person who can use these tools. And then in brackets some scholars then add, and who is the muqallid. So we know who the mujtahid is when they research it. Okay, who is the muqallid, and what are the conditions for him to do taqleed, and how does he do taqleed, and so forth. But Usul al-Fiqh then we said is 3 things as a subject. It's a subject or knowledge which researches the general evidences of fiqh. And the second part of the definition, وَكَيْفِيَّةُ الْإِسْتِفَادَةِ مِنْهَا, and how to benefit from these general evidences. And hal al-mustafid, and who is the one that's going to benefit, who is the one to use these evidences, who's the one that can use these tools and how to use them and so on. Now the author is going to break these 3 points down. The first one is going to be here, the second one here, and then the third one is here. So he says, we're going to look at the English translation in a bit after we just wrap this up, inshallah. So he says, فَالْمُرَادُ بِقَوْلِنَا, what we mean, what we intend with the statement ijmaliyya, general or comprehensive, الْقَوَاعِدُ الْعَامَّةُ the general principles, al-qawaid al-amma, the general rulings or the general principles. مثل قولهم, like their statement, al-amru lil-wujub, a command indicates obligation, is for obligations, for wujub. Or, and an-nahyu lit-tahrim, a prohibition or the prohibition is used for something being haram. Or was-sihhatu taqtadi an-nufudh, that something, when you describe something as being right, sahih, an action, then it means that the person is absolved of it. It has been fulfilled. So he's giving an example of some of these qawa'id. These are the general evidences and qawa'id that are spoken about in the first part of the definition of usul al-fiqh. When he says general, and then he gives us the, you can say the opposite. فَخَرَجَ بِقَوْلِنَا or فَخَرَجَ بِهِ, when we use this, when we say ijmaliyah, then we are excluding from this definition then al-adillatu tafsiliyah, the specific evidences, the ones that are not general. فَلَا تُذْكَرُ فِي أُصُولِ الْفِقْهِ, they are not mentioned in usul al-fiqh إِلَّا عَلَى سَبِيلِ التَّمْثِيلِ لِلْقَاعِدَةِ, only, they may be only mentioned, so they are not mentioned in usul al-fiqh except as examples to a certain principle. So for example, Allah says وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ. When you study fiqh, not usul al-fiqh, you start the chapter of salah, kitabu salah. It is wajib, salah is wajib. Allah said, evidence, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ. So now this evidence, is it used in the chapter of zakah? No. Is it used in the chapter of Sawm? No. It's only used in that specific chapter. It's for that specific, it's a specific evidence for a specific mas'ala. That's fiqh. Okay, in usul al-fiqh, they will say, okay, here, aqimu, command. A command is indicative of obligation. That's the evidence, that's the general evidence. When we say command is indicative of obligation, this is a principle, this is an evidence that goes through all of the different chapters of fiqh. You can prove something in zakah with that, you can prove something in salah, you can prove something in fasting, you can prove something in marriage. If you have a hadith and you say, okay, there's a command in there and the command indicates obligation, then you've used that general evidence. So now if we say the command is for obligation, for example, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ. Now this specific evidence that's used is only being mentioned here على سبيل المثال التمثيل. It's only mentioned here as an example. It's not the whole evidence. It's an example of the a command being an obligation. So usul fiqh deals with the general evidences and fiqh deals with the specific. The second part of the definition of usul al-fiqh, the Shaykh said, وَكَيْفِيَّةُ الْإِسْتِفَادَةِ مِنْهَا. So now we have these evidences that we learned, these general principles and evidences that we learned in usul al-fiqh. The second part of usul al-fiqh is how do we benefit from them? How do we use these evidences? So here the Shaykh says, here it means معرفة كيف يستفيد الأحكام من أدلتها بدراسة أحكام الألفاظ ودلالاتها من عموم وخصوص وإطلاق وتقييد وناسخ ومنسوخ وغير ذلك. Now that you have those evidences that you've used here, then you're going to learn how do you use these tools, how do you put them together. So sometimes you learn that there are certain things which are general and there are certain things which are specific in the language. Okay, then how do you deal with them? Sometimes this general, there's something that is general, has been specified in other parts. So now you're using the tools that this is specifying that general thing there, or this thing here is abrogating, or this evidence is abrogating this other evidence. So also in usul fiqh, you don't just learn the evidences, but you also learn how do you use those evidences, or how those evidences are used to bring about the rulings. something is nasikh and something is mansukh, something is mutlaq, but there was a taqeed, something was left unrestricted, but there was another evidence that restricted it. Okay, how do you deal with that? And then the third part of usul al-fiqh as a subject is وَالْمُرَادُ بِقَوْلِنَا حَالُ الْمُسْتَفِيد. And what we intend when we say hal al-mustafid, the condition of the one who benefits from it, معرفة حال المستفيد وهو المجتهد, is knowing the situation or the condition of the one who benefits from this subject, and he is al-mujtahid. سمي مستفيدا لأنه يستفيد بنفسه الأحكام من أدلتها لبلوغه مرتبة الاجتهاد. He is mentioned as the one that benefits because he is the one who is able to benefit and extract and bring out the rulings from the evidences, because he has attained the level of ijtihad. He is able to look at the evidences and extrapolate and take out the rulings. So here we talk about the ma'rifah al-mujtahid. فَمَعْرِفَةُ الْمُجْتَهِدِ وَشُرُوطُ الْإِجْتِهَادِ وَحُكْمُهُ نحو ذلك يبحث في أصول الفقه. So knowing who is the mujtahid, the shurut, the conditions of ijtihad, when can a person extrapolate rulings, what must be in place for him or her to do that, and what are the rulings connected to doing that, are there etiquettes to it, are there not etiquettes, and so forth. And as we mentioned, then in brackets here, as a side point, some of the scholars will mention, okay, what about the person who does taqleed, someone who's not mujtahid, what does he do? And they talk about, okay, taqleed, he has to follow someone who's a mujtahid. Okay, how does he do that? And when is it blameworthy, when is it not blameworthy? So that's the definition. So far then we've looked at the definition of usul al-fiqh from one angle, each word, usul and fiqh, what do they mean? And then we looked at usul al-fiqh as a subject heading, and we said the Shaykh said the definition has three main parts, and now he's going to tell us some of the benefits. So from the benefits the author mentions in Usul al-Fiqh, Ilmun Jadid, he says Usul al-Fiqh is a very important subject. It is of utmost importance and it has a lot of benefits. So from them is that the person is able to get the ability, he's able, or he becomes able, in a better way, he becomes able to extract the rulings of the Sharia, al-Ahkam al-Sharia, min adillatiha, from the evidences, from their evidences. Doing that upon a good foundation, doing that upon a solid foundation. So this is one of the benefits the author mentioned. There are other benefits even for the general Muslim. Just having an awareness of usul al-fiqh, even if he does not become a mujtahid, it helps him. It helps him to know that the scholars have rules and regulations in how they make rulings. It's not that just when you ask one scholar something, he gives you an answer. You may ask a different scholar something, he gives a different answer. It's not just based upon what they felt like that day, but there are rulings and regulations that they are going by, which those rulings and regulations themselves have foundations in the Islamic texts. And then last thing that he mentions, the author mentions here, is وَأَوَّلُ مَنْ جَمَعَهُ كَفَنٍ, the first person who compiled it, brought it together as a subject, like a subject, mustaqil in of itself, i.e. he made it its own subject, was Imam al-Shafi'i, Muhammad ibn Idris, rahimahullaah ta'ala. And then many scholars followed him in that. فَأَلَّفُوا فِيهِ التَّأَلِيفِ, and they wrote within that, in the subject, many books, mutanawwi'ah, of different types. مَا بَيْنَ مَنْثُورٍ وَمَنْظُومٍ, that from that which, or those books which are in normal prose, you could say, normal writing, and others which were in poetry form. وَمُخْتَصَرٍ, some were small, or some were small, you could say. وَمَبْسُوط, some were long books. حتى صار فنا مستقلا, until it became its own defined subject. Let's look quickly at the English. So here we have the author's introduction. The author, rahimahullah ta'ala, as we mentioned previously, gave a short introduction, and he mentioned the reason why he wrote this book. He wrote it for the curriculum of the third year of high school in the Institute of Islamic Knowledge, and he said, I have called it the foundations of the knowledge of Usool. And then he made dua with regards to this. Then he gave us the breakdown. He mentioned number one here, the definition, and we said that it can be understood in two ways. First, with regards to the two words Usool, and the second Fiqh, as individual words. So we have Usool is a plural of the word asl, and it means something that something else can build upon it, a foundation. Okay, and then he brought the ayah now. Then he brought the second word in this subject heading as this individual word, fiqh. Okay, and he gave us the linguistic meaning, and then he gave us a terminology meaning, the science of jurisprudence, science of fiqh. And this terminology meaning is what we looked at and broke into 4 parts, if you remember. Okay. Okay. Then he broke down this definition here. So this is the definition of fiqh. Okay, technical definition. He broke it down for us. So here he broke down what is ma'rifah in his definition. The second one, what in his definition when he said legal rulings, ahkam ash-shar'iyya, what does it mean and what does it not mean? And then he broke down the word al-amaliyya. I don't know why it's process. Amaliyya is actions. Yeah. And then he broke down the word specific evidences. The specific evidences, not the general ones like usul fiqh. And then he told us okay, where did he stop? Okay, so here he broke down up to here. This is the definition of fiqh. Okay, the last part. Then he said here, secondly, the layout is not as good as it should be. Secondly, what does it mean secondly? The second way that we can look at usul al-fiqh as a title. So the first way was looking at the words individually. So here secondly really should be the next paragraph. Secondly, with regards to it being a label for this particular science, i.e. secondly, with usul al-fiqh being a label for this particular science, then it is defined as, and he gave us the definition of usul al-fiqh, which we said has 3 parts. So it is a knowledge where the evidences of fiqh are determined in general. That's number 1, first part of the definition. Second part of the definition, and how they are to be benefited from, number 2. And the third part of the definition of usul al-fiqh, and the condition of the beneficiary, who is the one that can benefit from it, what is his condition, what is his situation, how he is, who is he. And then he broke down the meaning, the 3 parts of this definition. Okay. So that's, I think, part 1. Then we have part 2, and then the hal of the mustafid. Then he says the benefit of usul al-fiqh, and there are many benefits, and this is one of them. And then the first person to write in that, some of the history of it, and we mentioned mukhtasar al-tahrir there. So we stop there. If there are any questions, inshallah we take them. We're going to restart the room as we only have 1 minute left. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.